If you could look into the future and see whether somewhere down the line you might contract some kind of disease, would you want to know about it? This is often part of the controversy sparked by the idea of gene testing, but a new book claims that you can decrease the chances for getting a disease by outsmarting your genes. But first, you must know what you're in store for. Joining us this morning is the author of Outsmarting Your Genes, Dr. Brandon Colby. Dr. Colby, thanks so much for being here today.
Tanya, thank you so much for having me.
So tell us first of all what gene testing is exactly and why it makes so many people uncomfortable.
Sure. Well, gene testing is defined as looking at many different genes at once, and that allows us to assess your risks of many different diseases at a single time. And it's actually quite simple. So there's no blood and no needles. It's just some saliva that you give at your doctor's office, and from that we can go and look at many different genes that you have.
Is it expensive, first of all, to do this?
Right. So the cost has come down tremendously. It's just a few $100s right now.
And you say it's well worth the cost.
It is well worth the cost because this information is very useful. And people are usually fearful of this because they think, if I find out that I'm at risk for something, I can't do anything about it. What's the point of knowing I'm at risk of Alzheimer's disease? Or what's the point of finding out I'm at risk of colon cancer? But what Outsmart Your Genes discusses is that this information empowers us over disease so that we could use this information to protect ourselves against Alzheimer's disease, against cancers, all different types of cancers, against heart disease, and we could really use this information to find solutions to better health.
It certainly sounds very promising, but in all the research that you've done, how accurate does gene testing turn out to be in terms of determining someone's likelihood of contracting a disease?
Right, and that's a great question. The accuracy is actually extremely high. So the testing that is used now, the technology, is light years away from what it used to be in the 90s and even the early 2000s. And every week, in fact, it goes and it improves. So the technology, the testing itself, and the information that we have. Example of this is breast cancer. So we can use gene tests to assess your risk of breast cancer, but the real empowerment is what we do with that information. And knowing that you're at risk for breast cancer, the same genes could also put you at increased risk of breast cancer if you're exposed to radiation, such as from X-rays, CAT scans, or even mammograms. So if you think about when a child has a cough and goes to a pediatrician, just right away it's almost like reflex, the pediatrician sends the child for an X-ray. Or for most women, for breast cancer screening, they have mammograms. But if you know that you contain a gene that is putting you at risk for breast cancer, you can actually avoid radiation throughout your life. So that pediatrician isn't going to send that child for an X-ray. They're going to diagnose the cough and prescribe treatment some other way.
Now that's if you've done the gene testing to yourself and you're the parent of this child.
Well, that's if you actually have the gene testing for your child.
Oh, so people do it for their children a lot as
well. That's right,
that's
right. And that's the real revolution, is that we could become empowered over these diseases, even in when we're younger, for children, that we could start fighting against things like breast cancer, Alzheimer's, even in children, so that we don't have to wait until we're older, and we don't have to fear these diseases, that we could protect ourselves from a very early age.
Now, does gene testing tell you such detail, like, for instance, a diet or exercise plan that works for one person will not work for me because I have certain genes?
Right. Is there anything more frustrating than dieting?
Certainly not.
Right. So most people have that experience of hearing of a diet that worked for somebody, but then they try it and it doesn't work for them.
Right.
And many times the answers lie within our genes.
Fascinating.
And I know a guy is never supposed to say this, but sometimes the genes really do make a person look fat.
Right.
So you know, there are fat genes out there that cause people to gain significant weight. So the usefulness first is that people find a type of catharsis. So they find some relief in knowing that it is not just their self-will or not some bad habits that are causing them to gain weight, but in fact it's something innate. It's their genes.
So now I'd like to go back to the role that gene testing can play for parents. So in your book you recommend even children get gene tested.
That's right.
And if there is, like you said, some indication that this child, your child, may have a gene that would make him or her more likely to get cancer down the road, then you would ask your child's doctors, pediatricians, not to give them x-rays?
Well,
at an earlier age?
Right, so these are elective x-rays. If there's an emergency, if there's a car accident, then the x-rays, CAT scans sometimes cannot be avoided. But if it's something as simple as a cough, which a lot of times pediatricians just use x-rays because it's very easy to see if there's an infection of the lungs, that pediatrician would avoid the x-rays or exposure to radiation. So it changes clinical management in a very easy and efficient way, but that drastically lowers a person's risk of breast cancer throughout their entire life.
The idea that the radiation, of course, that you receive throughout your entire life is cumulative and never leaves your body, right?
That's right. It's almost like throwing gasoline onto a fire. So the risk of breast cancer is there, and then with the radiation, it just makes it the risk out of control.
And what about other cancers? I mean, how strong a weapon is gene testing in fighting Alzheimer's and all kinds of cancers?
Right, so when we think about colon cancer, we think about skin cancer, it's extremely useful because it gives us an ability to predict, and if we could predict, then we could prevent, and if we prevent, then we prevail over cancer.
So are you recommending that everyone ask their doctor about gene testing?
I do, and to make gene testing useful, I've developed a number of panels that enable a person to easily select what testing is going to be useful for them. So they don't have to know anything about the genes or even about the diseases, just have to choose a woman's health panel or a men's health panel or a dermatology panel.
Fantastic.
That makes it very easy, and that panel assesses all of the relevant information.
Dr. Brandon Colby, thank you so much. And for more information, you can pick up a copy of Dr. Colby's book, Outsmart Your Genes, at stores now. And don't forget, you can follow us on ABC News Now and Facebook and Twitter. Just search ABC News Now.